Monster Crown gameplay follows a rather familiar format, wherein you obtain and train a team of up to 8 different monsters and pit them against both wild and tamed foes in simple turn-based battles. Catching monsters is as simple as offering them a pact, which they then read mid-battle and then either accept or reject based on factors like level and health. Each monster can be one of 5 different types, each of which is resistant to one type and does extra damage to another, so it's critical you build your team not just with traditional roles, DPS, tank, etc., in mind, but also with enough diversity that you can realistically take on a similarly leveled monster of any type. And then things are mixed up a bit with the usage of the synergy mechanic too, which allows you to build a special meter by either swapping monsters or defending for a turn. There are 4 stages to the synergy meter, with each consecutive one stacking on new stat bumps and benefits that enable you to really let her rip when you finally act. Though the trade-off is obviously that every turn spent building the meter is one where you aren't attacking. Monster Crown is a decent game that falls short of greatness in a few areas. Legitimately cool ideas with breeding and an overall solid combat system are let down by lackluster monster designs and performance issues. Then there's the elephant in the room, which is that Monster Crown ultimately feels like a jankier and less addictive version of the oldest Pokemon games. Nexomon is another monster collecting game you should consider to play. Catch, evolve, and collect over 300 unique Nexomon. Battles are turn-based, and you just wail on each other until someone gets knocked out. There are status ailments, but these can more or less be ignored because hitting something with a big number is almost always preferable. A weird addition to Nexomon is the punishment for doing well. If you knock out a Nexomon in a multi-mon battle, then the enemy gets a free attack. There's nothing you can do about it, you just get smacked in the face. It's bizarre and feels incredibly cheap, almost like a way to balance out the combat in the worst way possible. Beyond its darker tone or even the few comical skits, mechanically the game pretty much gets really stale when it comes to its overall gameplay and execution. Mind you, it did come from a mobile game, so it did bring with it its little issues. Catching Nexomon is alright, but it suffers from early Pokemon syndrome. The genre has moved on. You weaken a Nexomon enough, throw a Nexobox, and hope you get a new buddy when all is said and done. Basic stuff. The issue is there's no way to track what Nexomon can be caught where. Nexomon is not a bad game, it's just not a very good one. It's passable, but there are much better games in the genre out there. In a nutshell, Nexomon is a cheaper yet interesting take of the classic Pokemon formula. There are some issues here and there, but it didn't change the fact that it also has its shining moments when it comes to its story and overall feel and design. If you're looking to just get that Pokemon itch off you for a while, Nexomon might very well do just that until the next Pokemon remake comes around. Moonstone Island is a new cozy life sim game that features a creature collecting twist, and it manages to pack a lot of content to explore into a little indie game. This game offers players well over 40 hours of relaxing gameplay that can continue even after the story is finished. It includes all the farming, crafting, decorating, and romancing of NPCs that are commonly thought of with a cozy sim, but blends it all with flying, magic, exploration, card-based combat, and creature collecting. Taming spirit creatures to then use in battles is how the little alchemist protects herself from harm and is able to get through dangerous temples and hazardous obstacles. Farming is essential to get necessary ingredients and materials, but so are other skills like foraging and mining. Combat in Moonstone Island instantly becomes a turn-based deck-building game using the spirits that are in the main character's medallion to fight against wild and vicious spirits from the open world. When not in combat, players can swap out or upgrade the cards that each spirit brings to fights. Similar to traditional tabletop card games, spirits have specific natures that dictate what types of damage they do, such as water, poison, or fire. Overall, Moonstone Island is a wonderful blend of deck building, creature collecting, and traditional cozy life sim. It is a game that makes it easy to lose track of time, as players may be left feeling like they could do just one more day before logging out. The quickness of the passage of time and the fact that the main story ends after 1 year is disappointing. but only because there is so much engaging content that Moonstone Island gives players to do that it feels like there should be more time to do it all, and more story to go along with it. Ever wanted to know what would happen if Pokemon and Final Fantasy had a baby? If you swap Pokemon for hats, then that's essentially what you've got here. This turn-based RPG features a cutesy world of Final Fantasy series monsters to catch and wear on your head in battle while you slowly unravel a deeper plot. You play as two siblings and be able to tame famous Final Fantasy monsters such as Moogles and Cactuars to do your battle. As you wander around the world, you'll find yourself in famous locations from the series, meeting familiar heroes, and uncovering a plot that's far darker than the characters' light banter suggests. While the siblings are pretty strong individually, they get even stronger depending on which of your adorable little Mirage friends you decide to plop on your head. They form a stack as all of your health and stats pool together, like Power Rangers morphing into that giant robot thing, fighting as one. Rain and land can also change size themselves, so have two types of stacks at their disposal. In their giant form, they can don two monsters on their heads, but as smaller Lillikins, they can ride larger beasts such as behemoths with just one critter on top. Adding these Mirages to your party plays out very much like Pokemon. You throw a prism at them after meeting certain battle conditions, and they'll get trapped inside. You can even level them up and evolve them over time into bigger, tougher monsters, unlocking new abilities over time. As you progress, you'll even find champion characters such as Cloud and Lightning from other Final Fantasy games who will join you for brief, powerful attacks, much in the same way as someone would in a traditional FF game. With so many Mirages and champions to find, there's a lot for die-hard series fans to do. But once you get past the 10, 15-hour mark, that variety seems to peak and battles start to get a little repetitive. Coromon is a Pokemon-like game and delivers as a monster collector. Something that really stands out about the Coromon combat system is its use of SP as opposed to each move having its own separate usage restrictions. As you would expect, each skill uses a certain amount of SP with stronger moves using more. When you run out, you can either recover through items or, crucially, you can simply skip a turn to recover half your resource. There is, of course, good and bad to this. It is an excellent tool to keep the action flowing should you run out of recovery items, and it means you don't need to sink money into a stack of them. However, it does take away some of the tactical challenge and renders battle a bit simpler than its rivals. Overall, however, I quite enjoyed the implementation of an SP system, and you can also choose not to rest. As it always was, and indeed shall forever be, leveling up, evolving, or throwing assorted discs and drives at your little friends will teach them any number of new battle moves, but you can only equip 4. Luckily, Coromon lets you change these on the fly whenever you like, so you can experiment with new tactics whenever you feel like it. For even more tactical choices as they gain experience, each of your cuddly monsters will also be filling up a second bar related to potential. When this fills you, you get a set number of points to add to any stat you like. It takes a lot of the margin of error away from Pokemon's old training and lets you accurately create your own bespoke fighter. Coromon is a worthy addition to the monster-catching genre. Coromon is a monster collecting game that adds some fantastic, modern systems and options to the genre, but also has some truly frustrating moments. If high encounter rates and unexpected forced stealth sounds like something you can push through, though, there are plenty of adorable creatures to capture and fight with. Monster Sanctuary is about a land where monsters can roam freely. You play as a monster keeper who's come from a distinguished family. The game is a 2D adventure with graphics that are reminiscent of classic Square Enix games like Secret of Mana or Chrono Trigger. After you've been given your first few monsters, you need to fight any others to get a hold of one of their eggs. You then hatch the egg, give the creature a ridiculous name, and upgrade its skills. So yes, instead of catching your monsters in a small ball, you're beating up their parents and snatching their eggs, which somehow seems even darker. The skill trees for each monster actually go pretty deep. They can learn different moves, have one of their physical traits increased, or have special effects and conditions enabled that can change how you use their skill set. You can make it so critical, hits apply a buff to a monster, any kind of healing ability also adds a shield, enemies who attack your team get damage reflected back at them, etc. Much like Pokemon, the battles are all about exploiting elemental weaknesses. You can carry a whole bunch of monsters, but you always have a team of 6 that you take into battle. Where Monster Sanctuary deviates from the normal Pokemon formula is that most of the fights are 3-on-3 encounters. This game puts a lot more emphasis on buffing your team and debuffing the other team. It's not unusual for there to be multiple symbols above each monster's head, indicating some kind of status effect. What makes Monster Sanctuary stand out the most is how monsters were used outside of battle. There might be a ledge with a treasure chest that's too high for me to reach, so I would have to use a flying monster to lift me up. The only problem is that it's not always clear what kind of monster you need when you encounter a spot you can't get past. Temtem is basically a Pokemon homage for the modern audience. Temtem's creature catching will feel immediately familiar to anyone who's even dabbled in Pokemon over the years. In some ways, it definitely surpasses Pokemon, like the fact that the story can get a lot more out there, but on the other hand, it does have some extra issues like endless battles that do bog it down somewhat. So it's a good game, but not nearly as good as it could have been. For starters, Temtem is an MMO. Kinda. You won't be stepping on others' toes while exploring, as interaction with other players is limited to chat, emoting, and challenging to battles. But the overworld is a bustling place filled with players and their pets. While geared for solo play, the entire story can be played cooperatively with a friend, and the endgame offers plenty of opportunity for groups to go dungeon crawling together. Temtem's biggest divergence from Pokemon is its more complex combat, sitting between Pokemon's kid-friendly design and Shin Megami Tensei's hardcore dungeon crawling. Temtem's battles against NPC tamers are frequently full 6v6 affairs, both sides deploying 2 creatures at a time. Between sharp AI and not skimping on enemy levels and stats, it's a surprisingly challenging campaign. For those used to sleepwalking through Pokemon, you might have to sit up and pay attention here. Overall, Temtem is a good game. It's held back a bit by how hard the game is being drawn out towards the end, though. There are just so many battles. They may not be super tough, but you still have to go back to the healing station each time after fighting them, and this gets old quick. Especially because the minion spawn rate is rather high too, so you have to be running away a lot. Monster Hunter Stories 2 is a spin-off of the main series. This game focuses on a turn-based battle system and monster catching mechanics in place of action. It's definitely got a touch of Pokemon to it. You can have a squad of up to 6 monsties. That's what a monster is called when it's your pet. That you can switch out depending on how a battle is going. Only one can fight beside you at a time, so you'll have to consider your choices carefully. Fights at their most basic are based on a rock-paper-scissors mechanic where speed beats power, power beats technical, and technical beats speed. But eventually, you'll also be taking weapon type, items, and element types into consideration. The turn-based combat gives you plenty of time to consider your options, and this is where the series finally clicked for me. Instead of having to dance around a flailing beast, considering which body parts to strike with which weapons and praying the hits will land, I was able to methodically go through what I wanted and have the space to understand just how all of the amazing layers of Monster Hunter's battles work together before striking. Monster Hunter Stories the 2nd of May look cute, but it still retains the huge amount of depth the series is known for. No, it's not as expansive or as fast-paced as the likes of Monster Hunter World, but that works in its favor. Cassette Beast is an indie Pokemon-like with lapsed Pokemaniacs in mind. Instead of capturing monsters with 2-toned balls, here you record them on cassette tapes through a process the game winkingly tells you not to think too hard about. Visually, the game looks like an Octopath-ed Pokemon Black and White, with colorful and wonderfully animated sprites battling across 3-dimensional backgrounds. The monster designs are creative and varied. Cassette Beast's charm is undeniable. This is a game aimed squarely at players who were kids when Red and Blue came out, who will laugh at Team Rocket being replaced with a group of evil landlords who look like vampires. Cassette Beast believes that its audience can grapple with concepts more complex than water is strong against fire. For example, if you attack a plastic type with a fire type attack, the plastic melts, changing the enemy's type to poison, which is then flammable if you attack it again with a fire type. That faith also extends to how you navigate its map. New Wirral is basically a 2D open world environment. It's not as big as Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, but it's dense with quests and contains surprising freedom. I constantly stumbled into interesting encounters, big and small, while wandering and listening to rumors. I appreciated the added agency, which recent Pokemon games have only just adopted. There's an appealing sense of adventure. With some of the same problems that plague its source of inspiration, Cassette Beast doesn't so much evolve the formula as it does swap it out for a different type. At the end of the day, Cassette Beast is a remix of a song you like. Just don't expect a remaster. Palworld is the new monster collecting game and defines a new Pokemon era. At first, it looks like a polished Pokemon clone, where you and your collectible monsters shoot people in the face with literal guns. A base-building survival game where you use your kidnapped creatures as laborers and may even resort to cooking and eating those unpaid employees when times get tough. An open-world co-op adventure where you and your friends thwack helpless sheep over the head with baseball bats to harvest their wool? Its survival mechanics are intuitive and deep. Its action-packed combat is silly and satisfying, and exploring its world in search of new Pokemon, or so-called pals, to kick the snot out of hasn't come close to getting old. Palworld isn't really that interested in being an actual Pokemon-like, or at least not in the same way as games like Cassette Beasts, Koromon, or Temtem are. Sure, you can call upon pals in battle to fight alongside you, and you can, via special pinecone doodads, teach them specific moves to add to their very limited skill set. Eventually, you can also set about breeding them, but the focus is never on the pals themselves. Rather, it's mostly about what those pals can do for you and your base, and how they can best service those needs via their stats, abilities, and traits. Even in its early access state, Palworld is amusingly irreverent, has a surprising amount of content and deep survival mechanics, and is absurdly difficult to put down. It's impossible to overlook just how shamelessly it takes ideas and designs from Pokemon. It's got some unsurprising bugs and performance issues, and the work of keeping your base's supplies topped off needs a little retuning. But when you're riding on the back of a flying dragon while shooting a blue duck with an assault rifle, most of those blemishes wash away entirely. This is already one of my favorite survival games, and I'm incredibly excited to see how it evolves.